Factoring quadratics, part 2. In part 1 of factoring quadratics, we looked at a quadratic expression that did not have a leading coefficient other than 1 in front of x squared. So we did not see any number in front of x squared. But we may have had some terms like 6x plus 8. So in that case, we said it could be factored readily by writing a pair of parentheses and filling the first part of the parentheses with the variable x. And now we need some numbers in the first set and also in the second set of parentheses. And how do we get those numbers? Those numbers add up to 6 and multiply to give you 8. So you would think of what two numbers you could multiply to get 8. And you might think 2 and 4. And 2 and 4 do add up to give you 6. So you say that the numbers are 2 and 4. And those are the numbers that go in the parentheses. And then you have got your factorization. So if you FOIL this, you would get this expression. So factoring is the reverse of FOILing. So when you FOIL, you multiply, here you're factoring. Now, in this video, we'll look at a quadratic expression that does not have x squared coefficient 1, but maybe something other than 1. So let me start with an example. Say I'm asked to factor this quadratic, 2x squared plus 13x plus 15. Now, there are many different approaches for factoring something like that, and some might be faster, but they would require some kind of guessing or some kind of trick, and it might be confusing. So what I'm going to show in this video is a 4-step recipe that might take a little bit longer, but you can factor any quadratic expression. So my first step, I'm going to break it down into 4 steps. The first step is to multiply 2 and 15. So multiply the leading coefficient and the constant term. 2 times 15 is 30. So step 1 is straightforward. In step 2, you want to come up with 2 numbers which add up to 13, just like here you would come up with 2 numbers that add up to 6. But here the middle coefficient is 13. So I need 2 numbers that add to 13 but multiply not to this but to 30. So what is my step 2? I will say complicate the middle coefficient, or complicate the linear coefficient, or complicate the coefficient of x. And what do I mean by that is I want to think of 2 numbers which add up to 13 and multiply to give me 30. So what 2 numbers multiply to give 30? Well, 5 times 6 is 30, but 5 and 6 don't add up to 13. So now you think about other combination. You might actually even think this, 2 and 15, but 2 and 15, they don't add up to give me positive 13. And then you might think 10 and 3. And look, 10 plus 3 is 13. So yes, we want to write 13 as 10 plus 3. And this is what I mean by complicate the coefficient of x. So I want to rewrite my quadratic expression, 2x squared plus 13x plus 15. It has 3 terms. Now I'm going to have 4 terms. Instead of 13, I'm going to write 10 plus 3. So 13x becomes 10x plus 3x. So that's what I mean by complicating. Usually, when you are given this expression, you combine these 2 like terms and write down this answer. And then you say that you have simplified this a four-term expression into a three-term expression. But now we complicated it. And what is the reason for that? You'll see that in step 3. So in step 3, you are going to factor by grouping. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Factor by grouping. So now you have 4 terms, 2x squared plus 10x plus 3x plus 15. You split it into 2 groups. The first group consists of the first 2 terms, and the next group consists of the next 2 terms. Now, when you are thinking only these 2 terms, you want to ask, what can I factor from these 2 terms? When I look at the coefficients, that's 2 and 10, which means I can factor out a 2. And now I can also factor out an x, because x appears in this as well as in the second term. So if you factor out a 2x, then 2x is outside. Now what goes inside is x plus, it was supposed to be 10x. I have a 2x outside, so it's going to be 5. Now I'm done with the first group. The second group, what can I factor? I have a 3x and 15. I can factor out a 3. I can't factor an x because I don't see x here. But 3 goes into both 3 and 15, so that's what I can factor. So if I'm rewriting this expression, the 3 is already out, so I'm only going to write x inside, and then plus 3 is out, which means I need a 5 inside. Now notice that you have 2 sets of parentheses, but they both contain the same expression, x plus 5. And that's what happens when you split your middle coefficient in this nice manner, 10 plus 3. If I had written this 13 as something like 12 plus 1, I would not have gotten this nice 4 terms. All right, so once you have this, it's like saying I have 2x times something plus 3 times something. So I'm only one step away from my final answer. In step 4, I'm ready to write down my factors. How do I get my factors? Well, one of them. So let me say the first term or the first factor is what's outside. So outside is 2x plus 3. And the next step is, the next factor is what's inside. Inside is x plus 5 in both cases. So there is my factorization of 2x squared plus 13x plus 15. So 4 steps. First step is straightforward. You multiply the leading coefficient and the constant term and get a number. And then in step 2, you want to split this middle coefficient, 13, into 2 numbers whose product is 30. So you're thinking 2 numbers that add up to 13 and multiply to give you 30. So what that does is it won't give you the factors right away, but it will allow you to rewrite your given quadratic expression with 4 terms. And we need these 4 terms because in the next step, we are going to factor by grouping. We are going to separate the 4 terms into 2 groups of 2 each. And we factor each one separately, each of the groups separately. And we notice that we would have the same quantity inside each parentheses. And then in step 4, it's time to write. You just copy what's outside for the first factor and then copy what's inside for the second factor. And there is your factorization. Let's look at one more example. So let's call it example 2. So this time, let me say I have to factor 3x squared plus 5x minus 2. So what is my first step? My first step is to multiply 3 with, now notice, The leading coefficient is 3, but the constant term is not 2, it's negative 2. So pay attention to the signs. You get negative 6. Now what do I do in step 2? I need to split 5 into two numbers. So what two numbers add up to give positive 5 and multiply to give negative 6? So what I'm doing is I'm thinking two numbers whose product is negative 6 and they should add up to positive 5. So if the product is negative, I know one of them has to be positive, the other has to be negative. And how do I get negative 6? Well, there are a few ways. So now I took care of the sign negative. Now I only want to think, how do I get 6? Either it could be 2, 3 or 3, 2, but the problem is if I take 2 and 3, they don't add up to give me positive 5 because one of them is a positive and the other negative. So whether it's positive 2, negative 3 or positive 3, negative 2, it's actually subtraction. So I'm not going to get positive 5. So the other way I can get 6 is if I multiply 6 and a 1. And since I want a positive 5 for the sum, I want to take positive 6 and negative 1 for the product. So this problem is a little bit complicated than the one before because of the negative sign. And in step 3, I'm going to rewrite my expression. I'm not going to write plus 5x anymore, but I'm going to use this. Plus 6x minus 1x, or I can just say minus x, minus 2. So now in step 4, or in the same step, I can factor by grouping. What's common to 3x squared and 6x is, if you look at the numbers, it's 3, and you can also factor an x. And what goes inside is x plus, to get 6x, I need to have a 2 here because I already have 3x outside. And now in this second group, I can factor a negative 1. So I get x plus 2 again. So notice you have the same quantity inside both sets of parentheses. So in step 4, we are ready to write down the factors. What are the factors? The first factor, I'm going to copy everything that's outside. So it's 3x, and then I have a minus 1 here. And the second factor is what's inside, which is just x plus 2. All right, let's look at one more example. Say example 3. I have, say the question is to factor 2m squared plus 5m minus 3. Now, the letter is changed to m, but it works exactly like the way it would if it was an x. So what is the first step? Well, 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. And in step 2, it's actually the same kind of problem that we had in example 2. I need to come up with two numbers that multiply to negative 6 and add to give positive 5. So this time I'm going to write, it's positive 6 times negative 1. That's how I want to think of negative 6. And in step 3, it's going to be 2m squared. 5m I should write as plus 6m minus 1m, or just m minus 3. And then I want to factor by grouping. So I get 2m for the first group that I can factor. And then it would be m plus 3. And then it's minus 1 times m plus 3 again. And finally, I would have 2m minus 1 and m plus 3. I went a little bit faster on this because you have already seen negative 6 multiply to give -6 and add to give +5, what those two numbers are. So let's look at one more example where we don't have that, we have some different numbers. So example 4. Let's talk about this one. Factor 2x square plus 7x minus 15. All right, so first step, you multiply 2 times -15 and you get -30. Now in step 2, you want to think two numbers which multiply to -30. It could actually happen to be these two numbers, but let's check. Is 2 minus 15, is that giving me +7? No. So since the product is negative, I know one of the numbers is positive and the other is negative. So what two numbers can I think of? How do I get 30? Well, 2 times 15, that's not going to work because 2 and 15 cannot combine to give me 7. 5 and 6 also give me 30 when I multiply, but a combination of 5 and 6 is not going to give me 7. The other thing is 3 and 10. And look, one of them is positive, the other is negative. So 3 and 10 can give me 7 if I think of 10 minus 3. So I need a +10 and a -3. So step 2 is the step that we have to work a little bit on in these kind of problems. So in step 3, we are going to rewrite. We are not going to write 7x. Instead, we want to write 7 as 10 minus 3. So plus 10x minus 3x minus 15. And then you factor by grouping. So from the first group, you can pull out a 2x. Then you would have x plus 5 inside. From the second group, you can pull out a -3. And here also you get x plus 5. So if you are getting the same quantity inside the parentheses, then what you did is right. But if you are getting different quantities, then you'll have to check. So this kind of splitting might not have been right. Now, finally, I can write down my factors. The factors are, the first factor I want to write what's outside, so 2x minus 3. And the second factor is what's inside, which is x plus 5. Yeah, these 4 problems should give you some idea as to how to factor a quadratic expression that does not have a leading coefficient of 1. And now I have some, but to get better at it, you need some practice. So go ahead and take a look at these 10 practice problems, and you can find the answers to them in the video description. So that's all I have for this video. I'll see you in another one. Good luck and thank you.